My name is Darin Bartik. I look after the products and solutions in the Dell software group for information management. So that brings me to my first question. Do you guys know that Dell has software? Do you guys even know that? Who have you heard that? Have you had communication from Dell that said that we've made multiple acquisitions and multiple internal developments? So good. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our information management portfolio and talk about some of the challenges that Dell now is hopefully able to help all of you with in your organizations. Okay. So thank you for joining us. I know that over the last 2 days, I have come to appreciate the traffic in Bangalore. So it's fun, and I know that when it rains, it makes it even worse. So thank you very much for making the time to be here and be away from work and your families. So today's conversation is really about these 4 questions that we kind of came into the conversation with, right? And I just want to kind of cover them briefly here and then introduce you to some of the challenges that we've seen in working with our customers and really our point of view as far as how we're approaching this topic as we work with customers like you, okay? So really the first one, exploiting big data and analytics. Who's taking advantage of big data and analytics today? Have you started to do this? Just a show of hands if anyone started to do this, okay? So in what way have you started to do this?
Hello. I am from a BPO, and we are looking at speech analytics, text analytics, and we're looking at data points to help our end customers look at any value add that they can do to enhance the customer experience.
Great. Speech analytics, text analytics, good. Anyone else? Someone else?
Thomson Reuters, of course, Reuters, we have a lot of products on the data analytics, from the financial analyst data. We do sell this as a service, so data is a no-brainer for us. That's our money-making cash cow.
You've been dealing with big data basically since you were born in the company.
Yes, absolutely. 1799.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Okay, great. I think that actually brings me to my first point is that big data, for all the trend and the hype, it's really not that new for a lot of companies, especially larger companies. They've been dealing in large volumes of data for a long time, and they've been dealing with analytics on that data set, which has been very complex. It's been very expensive. I think what has changed, though, is the economies associated with analyzing big data, collecting, storing, doing high-performance computing around that big data. That's changed greatly, right? So I think the opportunity for a lot of companies is to take advantage of new technologies, new approaches, and to look at big data in ways that can help your own organizations or your customers that you're acting with a service partner, okay? And the second one is convincing the C-level or the executives inside an organization, as many of you have responsibility to sell the benefit of what the IT group can do as you service and as you partner with the rest of the business. And I think that's actually one of the advantages that big data has done as a trend and as a, we had virtualization, we had cloud, and now we have big data. Maybe there's other BYOD and big trends. Big data has really helped many of our customers start to rethink BI, right? It used to be very much of a framework and a kind of a monolithic approach to business intelligence and kind of static reporting. And there's been a lot of new thinking around that. Based on the trend of big data, right? So it's just kind of a forcing function to rethink it. And I think it's really an opportunity for the groups in IT to take a new set of value propositions to the rest of the business in terms of being more flexible and providing information about the customer sets or the market set and really helping them understand how to either reduce costs or increase sales, hopefully driving more profit out of the business as a result of analyzing the information. Okay, so I think those two actually go together, right? Now the title of our session here, really Bridging the Gap Between IT and Business Analysts. Who thinks that the business associates on our side, even inside of Dell, I would be considered a business user, right? I'm a consumer of a lot of data and a lot of analytics inside of Dell. Do you think the business is generally happy with the BI results that we all have? Yes or no? Who thinks that? I know we're kind of poking at each other as we do this, but who thinks that the business is happy with what BI has been producing so far, the reports? Do the reports give them what they need usually? No? Most of it is? No. Okay. All right.
I think it's been a very positive experience in Unilever.
Yeah.
Especially in Hindustan Unilever.
What do you think is attributed to the positive experience?
I think it's the kind of strategy towards having one unified information warehouse, so that the cross-functional analytics as well as deep dive analytics is enabled.
Yeah.
So
Good.
eliminate the hurdles of multiple data sources, ensuring consistency, and remove the limitation on volume of data
Yep.
and the performance. So
Yeah. Good.
these
So you have a
characteristics-
centralized data warehouse, and that's really been the key.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Interesting. I'll come back to that in a second. Good. Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that one? No? Okay. Great. So we'll talk about the. I think Unilever actually maybe is a rarity in terms of many customers, because we find that probably 50 to 60, sometimes 70%, depending on who you talk with, in terms of BI projects have been failures or definitely not yet complete in terms of their initial visions. And a lot of that has been because of the same reason that you have had success. A centralized data warehouse has sometimes been a very big challenge, and we'll come back to why that's been. But we'll talk about what our approach is as far as connecting those two. Oops. And then the BI platforms with the new data types. So again, the original BI platforms from many of the vendors are evolving to adopt new data types, either from unstructured data stores or from new data types such as text and media and video and things like that, which is great. But it's a matter of how do you do that? How do you do it flexibly? How do you do it quickly? Right. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. All right. And then afterwards, I think we're all going to sit down, and depending on what table you're at, we'll talk about each one of these in a little more detail as it relates to your customers, or as it relates to your companies. So stepping back a little bit from the perspective just of information management and business intelligence and analytics, Dell itself has, as many of you have probably heard in the news, been going through some very interesting times lately, and that's all part of transforming the business into a broader, complete solution provider. We've been PCs and servers and networking gear for quite a few years now. We've acquired a large services organization from Perot. And now, really, as of this past year, just really in 2013, we've really started down the software road. And that's where I came in. I was part of Quest Software, which I think many of you are familiar with. And from the Toad product, it's one of the products that I have in my portfolio. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the software group is really a key component to Dell transforming. And these are the capabilities and the challenges, actually, that we're talking most with customers about as far as these end-to-end solutions. So if we look at a virtualized and converged data center, the overall infrastructure and the organization's challenge as far as becoming more fluid, getting away from very cost-intensive processes and data center setups from the past, doing both cloud and on-premise data center solutions. As it relates to the users and the workforce, making sure that we can enable a very remote and a very ever-changing workforce using different devices to interface, accessing from different locations, which brings in security concerns, which then brings back data concerns as well, because data is coming in from inside and outside the organization. Transforming and taking advantage of cloud, which really goes along with moving and simplifying the converged infrastructure, and then managing, delivering value from information. Again, that's the part that I'm most closely related to inside of Dell, and that's what we'll talk a little bit about today. So these challenges have really put us on a course to put these end-to-end solutions together. Okay, and we're doing that with the historical pieces from Dell, from the end-user component, both traditional PCs, desktops, but also tablets, mobile devices, and really taking advantage of the overall end-user computing situation, enterprise solutions, including servers, networking, storage, which we are definitely a leading provider of today, software, and then services. So really the various pieces that are involved, And I think as it relates to information management, most of that is actually with software and services. Very little hardware associated with many of those solutions. So it's a key component for us to build on and advance greatly in our portfolio. So as far as the software solutions, here's information management here in the middle, but we do have the other three capabilities around data center and cloud management, mobile workforce, and security/data protection. They kind of go together, right? So these are the four pillars, if you will, of the Dell software group, and those closely align with the challenges of the data center and the mobile workforce and protection of data, as well as perimeter and interior security with identity management, things like that. Okay, so it's a pretty broad portfolio. We're at about $1.5 billion of sales for the software group today, and we have a pretty aggressive goal of going towards $5 billion here in the next couple of years. That'll certainly be organic growth, but we'll be doing quite a few acquisitions as well in this particular space. So look for a lot of activity from Dell across the software stack. So let's get specifically to the conversation around information management and take a little bit of a historical view first, and it helps you understand how we're approaching it as Dell. So traditionally, I think much of our data was structured data, right? Fit into a relational database. It was very structured. We could use structured query language. In fact, you could use Toad and other IDEs to work with the data in the database as far as that's concerned. But it was very structured, and many times it could fit into a pretty self-contained area where it went through a tool chain of fitting into the database, coming maybe through a transactional system, and then it was managed in that database as far as the infrastructure and the data as it resided in that. And then it usually went through some type of ETL process. It was extracted out of the different transactional systems, transformed and loaded into that central data warehouse as Unilever was talking about, right? And then from there, a team, some type of analyst team or some type of DBA team would be looking at it from a provisioning standpoint, and they'd say, these different teams around the organization will need these different sets of data, so I need to extract that, query it, do very complicated cross queries and joins and cleansing of the data without messing up some type of master data management principles and governance principles, and then give it out to the analyst to actually do something with, right? Now, as this was relatively easy compared to what we are today, we had trained staff along the way there, right? If this complete stack was maybe an Oracle stack where we had everything in an Oracle database and maybe using business intelligence tools from there, it was relatively easy, but you still had trained staff across that team, right? But what we've gone through over the last few years is a pretty intensive change as far as the amount of data and the types of data and the velocity at which that data is being produced, right? Because it's coming from all different places, going through a variety of different RFIDs, machine-to-machine data being produced. Right? It used to be that it was just us producing the data via punch cards many years ago, right? Now it's coming from all different locations, and it's coming through a variety of sources, and it's obviously getting faster and faster, right? Every time you turn around, the rate of growth for data, there's a new data point, whether it be exabytes or zettabytes or yottabytes, depending on who you're talking with. But it's getting more and more difficult to manage, right? Because it's coming from different places. So instead of that rather simple picture, we end up with multiple sets of structured data and then multiple stacks of unstructured data, text, social data coming from outside the organization through social media, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, various other things, as well as the sensor data and text, machine, video data, et cetera. So you end up with a very complex set of trained staff that aren't necessarily able to go across systems, and then a very diverse set of data. And getting into that central data warehouse can often be a challenge and be very time consuming. So you do end up with multiple data silos, right? Who thinks their organization kind of feels like this today, right? Kind of diverse, or at least you can imagine going towards this, right? Because it's no longer a very static one stack of data management solutions, right? So, at Dell, We don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. We think this is just simple reality. Okay? Getting back to a simple picture of having everything be inside one data stack from one vendor and having everything be organized in one neat situation is not the way it's going to work. We need to be able to embrace this situation where we have data flowing in from multiple different places, but we want to be able to analyze it without having different analytical tools and different BI tools across these environments, right? So how do we do that, right? That's kind of how we're approaching it, is let the data sit where it sits and try not to transform it too many times in order to get it into a data warehouse. Let's be able to analyze it from where it sits and where it's produced initially, okay? So really, some of our theories here are to be data type agnostic. We want to be able to help you with any type of data that you have, be it a traditional structured data, machine-to-machine data, sensor data, RFID data, video data, etc., right? Things that are coming in from Facebook, Twitter. We want to be data agnostic and be able to help you with that. And we're very far along the way as far as being able to do that today. Vendor agnostic. All of you, I'm sure, have some type of BI and reporting tools today, frameworks, be it Cognos or Business Objects or MicroStrategy or something like that, right? ClickTech even is doing very well here in India too. We completely acknowledge that. We're the new guys on the block. What we want to help you do is take advantage of those investments, leverage those investments, but make sense of things that are coming from those different silos of information and be able to analyze and report on data that's coming from those different systems. So we're not trying to have you abandon your investments. We want to be vendor agnostic and say, how do we work with those and how do we pull data, or even at the metadata layer, from those systems, okay? As well as the BI and reporting vendors, it's the vendors in terms of the database and data stores. Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, Hadoop, MongoDB. We don't really care what those are. The tools that we're building and the capabilities that we're building will really be able to help you leverage those existing investments and your future investments. We don't want to have you constrict the types of investments you make based on the type of analysis work that you want to do later down the chain. Okay? Use the best things that are for transactional systems, whether it be a web-based application or an ERP application, a departmental application. Use the best things that are built for those, and then we'll help you analyze the data outside those. Okay? And data location, right? Whether it be inside or outside the organization, will help you work across those locations, okay? As well as geographies, right? It shouldn't be that you have to get all your data into one place, into one location geographically in order to analyze it, right? Again, let's help you leave the data where it is and do smart analysis in real time at that time, okay? Okay. So it really comes down to three main capabilities that we have across this category, and that is be able to manage the databases, which is where we kind of grew up as Quest Software and some of the other assets at Dell. Manage the database and the data that is in the different data stores. Be able to integrate that data across the data stores as well as the applications that depend on that data, and do it in a much more fluid, flexible way than some of the traditional ETL tools that we've had, and then be able to discover trends and make sense of the data that is across your organization, okay? So manage, integrate, and discover/inform, okay? So a little bit of history as far as we got here. This might be a little bit of an eye chart, but although Dell is relatively new to the software game in terms of it being Dell, the capabilities that we have are very much based in a long history of experience. Many of you I know use some of the traditional tools from the database management side of the world as far as development and administration. Those capabilities help take us into querying the database, right? Many people were using our software tools to just query the database and provide that data. So we then took our tools and built specific tools for querying, and instead of, again, doing it from a query to Oracle and then a query to SQL, do one query that crosses different platforms, and you join it in real time as you do that query. Okay? So again, it's a much faster, more flexible way to do that type of thing. Our Integration capabilities came from a company that was started about 12, 13 years ago. It's called Boomi. Who's ever heard of Boomi? All right, good. It's not surprising because Boomi hasn't made its way to India yet, really. We're just now starting to bring it over into this region of the world. But what Boomi does is very similar to the capabilities around Informatica, TIBCO, WebSphere as far as application data integration, but it's entirely cloud-based. We built it on the principle that you are starting to adopt cloud-based applications, Salesforce.com, Taleo for HR, and others, right? How do you easily and quickly get data integrated from on-prem to cloud-based applications or cloud to cloud, prem to prem, et cetera, right? How do you do that inexpensively and quickly? And that's really some of the principles that were based around that. And that started quite a few years ago, and that was acquired by Dell, and you see some of the other capabilities, including the Toad Intelligence Central, which is a fundamental piece to helping bridge that gap between the different types of analysts. You have systems analysts and data analysts on sometimes more of the IT side, and then you also have business analysts that are actually exploring the data, analyzing it, the people that understand the data. How do they collaborate back and forth? That's the capability there. So this has been a long history of ours to build out many of these capabilities, and now they're just really all part of the Dell portfolio. But we're not done yet. There's a long line of things to come. We're looking at much more around the analytics space, well beyond what we already have, which is focused on Hadoop-based analytics. The capability that you described there as far as searching through text and video files, natural language processing to understand actually what's being said, sentiment analysis around social media, as well as just text information. There's a lot of capabilities that we have that we're excited to start talking with customers like yourself about. So really the capabilities, not that I'll go through each one of these in detail, but it gives you an idea of the breadth of the portfolio that we have today in terms of managing the infrastructure, integrating the information, and then also analyzing the information. Okay, and I'll go into a little bit more, but as you can tell, we're really trying to get towards that theory of being vendor agnostic and data type agnostic. So with various data stores across SAP HANA, Sybase, Oracle, SQL Server, Oracle's where much of our lineage has been, but included in things that are supported outside the organization and supported with partnerships, including Teradata and things like that. Structured, semi-structured, text, and unstructured. So really this portfolio crosses these different data types and the different vendors that are housing a lot of the information that you have. Okay. So really, in summary, and this is meant to be just an overview that we can then start talking about at the tables to really start talking about how do we now put this into practice with customers, and how do we put it into practice with your business in terms of bridging that gap between what the business may need and what the IT group is actually able to produce today. But it really comes down to being vendor, data type, and data location agnostic. Okay. So just to summarize again, a couple of the theories that we have here, the centralized data warehouse, right? That many of the customers have kind of been led to believe is the key to success, has been a difficult thing for many customers, mainly because it's difficult and time-consuming to get data into that centralized data warehouse, right? To get it into a structure and have to transform it, right? In terms of having the data spread around the organization, that makes it more difficult, right? How do you reach out into those capabilities? We want to help you do it at the time you do the analysis, not do a lot of upfront work to get it into a certain location in order to then do analysis at that time. So we use a concept more called a logical data warehouse or a virtual data warehouse, depending on how you want to look at it, where it's not actually physically moving things, but it's making a virtual copy of it, right? So these are just a couple of the other ideas that we have and the approaches. So I'd be interested in talking with you more about it. I want to give you a couple examples of what we're doing with customers, and then we'll and then we'll wrap up and start talking at the individual tables. One of the banking organizations that we work with had a very complex, heterogeneous environment. And this is where Toad data point came into play. So instead of using different query tools to go into these different data platforms, they're able to use one tool that actually many of them are very familiar with because they used it to develop their database applications. And they can do one query across these different data stores and pull it back into one data set and then cleanse it and provision it out for further analytics. Okay? So this is one that they helped the team increase their productivity by about 33%. So that's good return on investment, a relatively simple challenge. Right? Another one is more into the big data capabilities, if you will. A particular pharmaceutical organization that we were working with was trying to understand where they had all of their indications and where they had their drugs being used. Okay, so they focused on one particular one, and they wanted to understand across all their different documents, their text-based documents, what the indications were, where it was being used, worldwide, what type of patients was it being used against. And instead of having to crawl through it literally, manually, and physically, they put one of our products against. It's called Katanga Analytics. It's in the big data analytics space. And it's able to understand it through natural language processing and machine learning capabilities, run it against a Hadoop-based data set. And it came back with a lot of relationships and pattern discovery across the different locations and different information as far as what they were using the drug for. So it let them do something not faster than they would be able to, but it let them do something that they weren't able to do before. They couldn't figure it out before. So this actually helped them do something that was impossible before. Okay? And then one last thing, we're actually using a lot of these capabilities inside of Dell itself. Mu Sigma is actually, some of you may have heard of Mu Sigma. They're actually based here. And we work with them pretty extensively inside Dell to do a lot of our analytics itself. And they're using our capabilities, our software capabilities, to do a lot of this. So before at Dell, many of you are probably familiar with this, you had rather simple, helpful reports, but they were manual. They were based in Excel. They weren't able to be replicated and automated over time. So you had to do it each week. We get a report like this. Actually, I get a report like this every week. And it was literally 4 guys every week churning through data, producing Excel and PowerPoint-based files. Right? And they had to do the same things every week over and over again, spending a lot of time doing it. So now using Toad BI Suite, they're actually able to get visualization, drill down through it, and compare different metrics across the information, as well as do some conditional formatting that they weren't able to do before. And the beauty of this one is not the fact that it helps you maybe visualize it easier, because you can do that with a lot of capabilities, but it's automated. They set up these capabilities one time, and then they schedule it as far as the run and the report run, and it just comes out the very next week at that time. And the other thing that's behind the scenes that you can't really see from this type of thing is that it's going across many different data sets, and in fact across firewalls and across different parts of Dell, because we have gone through quite a few acquisitions, and the ability to create a report that includes, I think, 8 different acquisitions across different types of the organization, not to mention geographical distribution. The ability to do that is quite complex and included multiple people. Now it's a matter of literally they don't even have to click a button every week. It's automated and it runs. Right? So it's helped us out quite a bit. And we've done a very similar thing for a different part of the organization, where it literally turned from an Excel report. I mean, I think we've all done this for years, right? And then converted it over into very visual, drillable capabilities that can be accessed through mobile interfaces, et cetera. Okay. So that's what I wanted to introduce today, just to help you understand kind of where we're going and some of our theories and the approaches in terms of bridging that gap and helping you make your business intelligence processes more successful. Just kind of scratch the surface a little bit today, but hopefully that'll give you an idea of where we're going, and we can start to have some conversations, I think, here at the tables now. So Before we do that, any questions for me before we start going around?
Can you explain the virtual data store concept?
Sure. So instead of actually requiring your data to be in a physical data warehouse, which is fine, it's actually part of our strategy as well, you can have effectively a copy of it, but it's a cached copy in a database. It's actually a MySQL database at the back end of the product. But it doesn't create a copy and keep it there. It keeps it there just during your analysis, and then it wipes it. So if you have, so the way, I'll give you an example of the way this works inside of Dell, and it was actually kind of similar to, wow, that's weird, there's like three of me. The way it works is we had data sets in Oracle underneath a Siebel CRM application. And then we had it in Salesforce.com, and then we also had Excel-based spreadsheets. Okay, what you can do with the Toad BI suite is reach into those three different data stores at the same time, and it'll pull a copy of the data that you need. It'll mash it up basically into one set of data. You can manipulate it, you can cleanse it, transform it if you want right there in the analysis process. But then as soon as you're done with it, it flushes the data so that it never makes an additional copy. You don't want to create an additional copy. You want to leave it in that initial
How do you
store.
ensure reusability and consistency? If every user is trying to go back to all the data all the time.
Because next time it wants to run that report, it'll take a fresh copy. Because as you know, as soon as you make a physical copy of something, it's going to be out of date, right? It's out of date as soon as you make a copy. So you want to take a virtual copy, run the report, and then the very next time you run the report, it'll run it on the most recent copy of the data, the most recent version of the data, right? So like sales data, right? If I want to say what are the sales metrics for a particular month, right? That shouldn't change, but the customer accounts and the content around those sales transactions may have changed, right? Addresses of the companies, contact information of the companies, etc. So some of that may have changed around it. But it's also, if you want to give me the most current week, instead of saying a new date stream, you just say the current week, and then it pulls the most current week, right? Instead of actually trying to tell it specific dates.
But
and things
for
like
every user, they're going to hit these independent databases every time they want to get information.
You can set it up. You can set it up that way, or you can set it up such that the analyst on one side of the equation, on the IT, the provisioning side, he'll set up those queries, and then the consumers of it, just the analysts over on the business side, they'll work with what they've already queried. So you can set it up as a real-time query for a business side, or set it up so that the IT person does the query. Okay. Other questions?
How is the responsiveness managed?
How's the responsiveness managed?
Yeah, speed, performance.
Right. It's very good. I mean, we haven't had problems. I mean, are you looking for like performance metrics, or what do you mean?
Yeah, in terms of speed of response. Let's say you said it makes a copy on demand. And
right. I think we're up to about 6 million rows a minute as far as querying the information, and then once it's made that virtual copy, it's instantaneous.
But how long it takes to make a copy?
Like I said, I think we're up to about 6 million rows per minute. So it's making that query and making the virtual copy at that point in time, right? It's meant to be used as a decentralized tool, right? You're not going to use that capability to do the standard singular reporting for an entire large organization. Again, because of the decentralized kind of distributed nature of our organizations now, we want to say that's okay, that's the way it's going to be, and so this is really to augment kind of the centralized single reporting instances. Right?
How easy is it to do the customization?
Customization, and what I mean to say is, can you do simple SQL scripting and do the customization,
Yeah.
putting the business rules and financials rules?
Yeah, good.
Is that how it is done here?
So if you're familiar with, many of your developers and your analysts today have used our Toad product for years, right? and it's meant to help people work with SQL that haven't worked with SQL before. We took that basic principle and applied it to the business intelligence and the analytics tools as well. But the key here is that it's two different client tools. I'm not someone that works in SQL every day, as I'm sure that most of you aren't either, right? You may have in the past, but you have people on your team that work in SQL every day. Toad Data Point is the SQL-based product that is really made for people that live and breathe in SQL every day, and they can write those queries using SQL very easily. It's drag and drop. You can map it using, kind of like modeling mapping tools. But then the other piece, Toad Decision Point, which is really meant for more of the business analyst. There's no SQL language in it at all. It's all drag and drop interface, and it's more of a business tool, similar to how a Tableau might work or something like that. Okay, we actually see that as something that we can feed, so you can actually work with it. So Toad Data Point is a product that the IT group can use. They can actually provision data out to a Tableau user, and they can suck in those data sets into Tableau, right, or a ClickTech or something like that. Okay. So it's made to be built for the analyst, depending on what type of analyst they are. Are they somebody that is from the IT side of things or somebody that's more from the business side? Okay, that was a fundamental principle as well.
If you have multiple lines of businesses and different applications which would have come with your acquisition, and you put this kind of a virtual application which can go across to any underlying source, how has been the management of challenges of metadata harmonization, hierarchies, master data, and things like that? Is it very easy or?
Yeah, good question. So I'll give you the example actually that we went through, that we're actually still going through. So Dell itself, when we were acquiring so many organizations into the software business, getting those exact reports actually put together, we couldn't get it all into the data warehouse fast enough in order to have everything structured, everything cleansed, all the metadata taken care of, and fitting with the product hierarchy fast enough. But we still wanted to do the analysis of the revenue results for each quarter and each week, the cost analysis, and putting together the P&Ls. So that's where a capability like this really came in handy. We didn't have to have it in the data warehouse in order to do this reporting. Now, is this a substitute for having a physical data warehouse? No. Because actually Dell has probably I think it's the second largest Teradata warehouse in the world. So it's not meant to replace it, not meant to say a physical centralized data warehouse is bad, but until you have it set up or until you have data in there, which has to go through the ETL process, et cetera, and all the governance rules, this is a way that you can get the data into the hands of the analysts very quickly, right? But then also, once you have it into the data warehouse, this can pull from the data warehouse as well. So today, I can pull data out of Teradata and then also mash it with an Excel spreadsheet based on either a customer interaction that I have or some other type of ad hoc query and data set that I have, right? It's meant to provide the more flexibility that the business is looking for instead of waiting for everything to be in the central data warehouse, right? The other thing is, when you have everything in the central data warehouse, it becomes that much more important and that much more critical, and you also want to have fewer and fewer people hitting that data warehouse, right? So I get told you can't pull anything out of Teradata for 3 days. Well, what do I do? Because they don't want to impact production because they're running certain queries and reports, right? Performance, they don't want to impact performance. So I'm thinking, well, what do I do for my analysis while I wait, right? That creates a real challenge for me. So it's trying to create that flexibility around the organization. Okay. Anything else?
So you release a repository to pull in between multiple data sources and a limited database is being created here.
Right. Right. A cached copy of it that only exists during the analysis portion.
Which is pulled from multiple sources.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So you seem to be positioning it with an additional investment for people who already have some BI tools, right?
Yeah, definitely. It can be, I know, I don't mean this to be a kind of a non-answer, but it can be both, right? We have small organizations. There's a university in the United States that had some basic reporting capabilities. They mainly were using Excel for most of their reporting, but they're using Toad BI Suite now in kind of the prototypical way where they have IT analysts that are provisioning the data and then business users, including their partners outside the organization, that are consuming and working with the data as far as the slice and dice and kind of visualization of it. So it's kind of serving as their central business intelligence platform. But they're quite a small organization, and they didn't have a lot of existing investments. Most organizations, I think many of you in the room, you have existing tools in place. In fact, most of you, I would think, you probably have more than 3. How many do you have? Who has 5 BI systems? Anyone? We've worked with many companies. In fact, I think the largest number of BI tools, or at least they would consider them BI tools, the most that I've ever seen was actually at Dell. We have 15. So basically, if you have a BI tool, Dell has it. If they make a BI tool, we have it. So, but the problem is that it kind of goes back to that graphic I had where you have different silos of information, right? In our organization, MicroStrategy was being used in part of the sales organization. Teradata was the fundamental data warehouse, and that had certain reporting tools. Oracle Business Intelligence was the platform that came from Quest. So we had different tools across different sets of businesses, but yet there was no easy way to pull data from the different systems and provide a centralized view relatively quickly, right? And that was really the aid that they saw with BI Suite inside of Dell, right? But that's just one of the capabilities, right? There's quite a few other things. Other questions or comments? I don't know if are we doing on time? I think that's pretty good. Okay. All right, so I'll hand it back over to our MC, and we'll start the next session of the evening.